All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
I am here for you. Thank you for that smattering of applause. It means so very much to me. Guess who's here today? Albert is here.
Albert, thank you.
And Kim is here.
Kim, how are you?
And I am here. Nothing? Really?
Wow. Yeah.
That's the kind of morning I'm having too, everyone. I know. It's, I spent my morning, as many of you know, nursing my 18-year-old cat who is very ill. He has manifestation. I thought, honestly, that he was passing away like 6 years ago.
Oh.
And I'm so delighted that he's still around. But, man, he is really sick and gets all this intestinal stuff, so the place looks like a crime scene every morning. And anyway, so for those of you who have spent the morning, as have I, cleaning up cat pee and poop, a special shout out to you. Yeah, look, I'm not above it, is what I'm saying. I'm not.
Big shout out.
All right, now, what a show you have happened upon today. Nathan Taylor from the Election Truth Alliance will join us this hour, as a matter of fact. Yeah. And Donald Trump has found new ways as president of the United States to enrich himself. And it's a sight to behold.
Don't talk to me that way.
It's the kind of thing that you would think might run afoul of the law. So we have a lawyer, former federal prosecutor, and distinguished defense attorney now, David Katz, joins us in hour two to help us speak about everything from the plan to sue the government that he is in charge of for $230 million for the pain and suffering that he went through as a result of investigations and indictments associated with Donald Trump's Russia investigation, the collusion with Russia, also the document case in Florida, the retention of top secret documents, which
it was very inappropriate.
Was the kind of thing that seemed to be an open and shut case, but of course it ended up with the concierge judge down there in Florida who was able to scuttle the case for Donald Trump. So the one thing I'll say as an aside, and then we will get into that in hour two, just on that point about the president somehow suing for the pain and suffering associated with this. It's not as though he was acquitted of this. I mean, it's not as though this is even a righteous battle. In other words, I don't understand. The facts really aren't on his side. He got a break because, as I say, a judge scuttled the case, really just put it kind of back-burnered it, knowing that that would kill the clock. And then ultimately the charges were dropped because, as I told you yesterday, and as we told you at the time, Jack Smith, who was prosecuting the case, realized that adherence to the law dictates you have to drop the case because you can't bring the case against a sitting president. That's the only reason the cases went away. So the idea somehow that you're going to sue over the fact that these cases were brought, that implies in some way that you were found innocent of a crime or not guilty, or some sort of adjudication ended up with you being, again, found to be an aggrieved party. This is
Mark,
not the case here.
They were weaponizing the Justice Department, Mark. I mean, it's never been done before.
That's true. That is the, I mean, that's what he's saying.
I've never seen anything like it.
And so you end up with this case in which Donald Trump will likely give himself $230 million. And when asked what he thought about it, the majority leader in the House of Representatives, MAGA Mike Johnson, said what? It's the thing they all say, you know? They say, I'm just hearing about it. I haven't really, I don't know the facts of this case, but gosh, I've just read a little bit about it. Then he went on he segued immediately to the fact that Donald Trump is constantly hassled. They're after him all the time. And, so I can understand why he'd feel like he's the aggrieved party here.
Since he always answers the questions that way, doesn't it seem like he doesn't know much? I mean, you must be really woefully uninformed if every time someone asks you a question, your first answer is, oh, gosh,
I didn't know
don't
anything
really know
about
much
it.
about
Right.
that.
Didn't know anything about it. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It's kind of their go-to response.
What?
With my credibility glasses firmly in place, Albert, I wonder if you can uncork for me. We have a lot in the show today. As I mentioned, I want to talk about the elections. We'll talk about that both with Nathan Taylor from the Election Truth Alliance and also prior. I'd like to talk about how the new administration, I still call them new administration, what are they, 8 months in, they have populated the administration with those who are in key positions of election integrity. The federal government, of course, has instruments such that the elections can be monitored and observed by the feds to make sure that everything is kosher, And they have now populated those positions with people who are all election deniers from 2020. And the idea is that you essentially have set up in all these different ways an election that is likely to not reflect the kind of integrity that you want when it's really the only chance for the people to express their voice at the ballot box. We'll talk more about that. I also have something from Barack Obama. We'll do that a little bit later this half hour. But first, some big news to share out of the world of arrests and the law. We'll talk about it in a segment we call Law and Disorder.
In the criminal justice system, the people,
Pimps, addicts, thieves, bums, winos, girls who can't keep an address, and men who don't care.
are represented by two separate yet equally important groups.
A cop, a flatfoot, a bull, a dick, John Law, you're the fuzz, the heat, you're poison, you're trouble, you're bad news.
These are their stories.
Let's start with the crypto pardon. That's right. President Trump pardoning Changpeng Zhao, the billionaire founder of the cryptocurrency exchange Binance. Binance, this massive cryptocurrency exchange run by Changpeng Zhao, who admitted in 2023 to money laundering violations. And again, Binance so massive that the money laundering violations, and this is admitted in his plea, allowed terrorists, drug traffickers, and other criminals to move money on the Binance platform. Zhao is the majority owner of Binance. It has a deal, does Binance, with the Trump family's crypto startup.
Oh, fun.
That,
Are you saying that crypto and Binance is the way that criminals move their money around?
without question, it is
Oh,
the way that you
fun.
can pay someone off or some entity off, and there's very little way, even though it's on the
Wild
blockchain.
idea, but it just might work.
And it's suggested that the Trump family has very much benefited from that so far. Talk to David K. Johnson. You can talk to Sarah Kendzior about this. Talk to pretty much anybody. It's right out there. So anyway, this Binance connection to the Trump family, it's suggested, has led to the pardoning of this guy who's the majority holder of Binance. President Trump exercised his constitutional authority by issuing a pardon for Mr. Zhao, who was prosecuted by the Biden administration in their war on cryptocurrency, said Caroline Levitt. The pardon was, of course, the latest example of how high-profile business partners of Mr. Trump and his family have benefited from his rollback of the wide-ranging crypto crackdown that was orchestrated by Joe Biden. To seek the pardon, Mr. Zhao hired lawyers and lobbyists who had ties to the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Binance struck a business deal with World Liberty Financial. Does everybody know what World Liberty Financial is? You'll recall that. We talked about it at length. It is the Trump family's crypto startup. It's kind of like the eBay of crypto, or a better, it's like the E-Trade of crypto, right? Like it's like a Charles Schwab. You can buy and sell crypto on the Trump family platform. So there is Zhao, and Zhao's business, Binance, struck this deal with World Liberty Financial. That deal alone is poised to generate tens of millions of dollars a year for the Trumps and for the family of Steve Witkoff, because Witkoff, who's the Middle East advisor, he's also doing the Ukraine deal. He was Trump's golfing buddy. He's also a real estate billionaire. His son is in business with the Trump sons on this platform, the crypto platform. So again, this deal alone generates tens of millions of dollars. And that's from just the Binance buy-in, okay? Not to mention all the millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars you get with every all these various trades in the collective. But the crypto industry's richest man, Zhao, a Chinese-born executive who now lives in the United Arab Emirates, admitted that he had violated the law by failing to install rigorous compliance systems at Binance that allowed people in countries under sanctions and terrorist groups like Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State to move money on his Binance platform. When he pleaded guilty, Zhao, who goes by CZ, stepped down as chief executive of Binance, though he remained its majority owner, held on to virtually all of his wealth. Now he could have an opportunity to retake direct control of the exchange. The pardon could make it easier for Binance to establish a presence in the U.S. market and then challenge domestic exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken. You see how this stuff matters in the overall business environment.
Does it say how much he paid for the pardon?
Well, we know he bought into the World Liberty Financial. I mean, I think that's pretty much all you had to do.
Yeah.
And then, as noted, he employed lawyers and lobbyists to get this done. But this is by far the biggest crypto exchange in the world. And at times, they note here, it has processed as much as 2/3 of all digital currency transactions. 2/3 of all crypto is traded on Binance. To have them back in the game is huge. So, and you know, FTX was that other major exchange. It went down because of the arrest of their CEO. And with them out of the game, Binance may be the big player in crypto. So he gets his pardon, and the Trump family gets to rejoin them and Binance with World Liberty Financial. Meantime, the Trump administration planning to demolish the White House's entire East Wing. At the same time, the cost of the ballroom now, instead of the $200 million, is being revised. And like many contractors revise, they tend not to revise down. The new cost will be $300 million.
What?
Yeah.
So we went from the East Wing won't be touched, the ballroom will be just adjacent, to we're just knocking down the facade to make an entryway from one building to the other, to now the entire East Wing is a goner?
That's right. You've got it, Kim. It's a 90,000 square foot ballroom project that was, as Kim suggests, promised to exist independent of the White House. It won't interfere with the current building. Those were the words of Donald Trump, the president. But now it turns out they'll need to get rid of the East Wing, and the cost of the entire thing is going to be now up to $300 million. Now, no one has asked this question that I've seen, but can I just ask it? How the hell are you spending $300 million to build this ballroom? I just don't. What are you building it out of? Bricks of cocaine? I don't understand why it's so expensive.
That's gold.
Do
to
that
you,
math.
Mark.
It's more than $2,000 a square foot. I don't understand how you spend that kind of money. But I do understand the promise that's been made that there'll be no taxpayer money dedicated to this build.
Except
it's going to
maybe
be done.
except the 230 million that he's going to give
Right.
to charity. Suddenly, the charity might be the ballroom. I don't know.
I promise you that $230 million that Trump will get, because he's the one who has to approve it, it'll go right into his pocket. It ain't going into the ballroom. The ballroom is going to be paid for by Palantir, by Meta, by Google. It's already happened. We've already we detailed on this show 25 million here, 10 million there. So the idea somehow that this is going to be handled by private money, that's not supposed to happen either. Do you understand the way in which there is a quid pro quo associated with private money going in? So I don't care that I'm glad it's not being done by taxpayer money, although I don't necessarily even believe that that's true. But the idea, at least as articulated, that it's going to be sponsored, if you will, by, I don't know, crypto.com or whatever, Binance. Yeah, it'll be the Binance.
It'll be the Binance ballroom.
Or the World Liberty Financial Ballroom, whatever. That's not the way it's supposed to be. This is an outrage. It's a perversion of the symbolism associated with the White House, which is the people's house, and also the actual practical restrictions on buying influence. I mean, you essentially are, this is a White House that's wildly open for influence peddling, as we know. But everything is being done in this coarse, loathsome way. And so the latest is East Wing gone, 300 instead of 200, and that's the latest on that.
Calvin
Meantime,
Wong is asking if you could ask Mr. Predicto if the price of this ballroom will balloon up to 500 million.
Oh, I'll just ask Mr. Predicto, will the price of the ballroom exceed the expressed 300 million? Will it go beyond 300 million? I ask you, Mr. Predicto.
Everything points to no.
Oh, so Mr. Predicto thinks that it will stay at 300 million. Shadow producer Calvin Wong. So, yeah, it's a bargain at 300 million. And there was major news this morning out of the FBI, and it dealt with some very high-profile people. The head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers is among those charged in an illegal poker operation tied to the mafia. Meanwhile, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, or is that how he says his name, Albert? You're the commish.
Yeah, that's correct. He has before you get into it, he had ties even last season to an investigation that the NBA made. So the FBI on Terry Rozier did their own investigation and actually found stuff.
I see. Yeah, he illegal gambling is what I think that case was about. So, but this is pretty serious stuff. The poker games apparently included basketball players lending credibility to their authenticity, the authenticity of the games. And then the games were allegedly rigged in favor of those running the games. They used technologies like rigged shuffling machines and X-ray technologies. You could read cards facing down on the table. I didn't even know you could do this stuff. And I played a lot of poker. And I played in some games with some of these guys, but not in these games that they're talking about. I mean, these are obviously games where there's, I think, some sick amount of money, being shoved around the table. Athlete type salaries you need to play these games. But
so there's ties to the mafia here, and everyone who was a part of these poker games were in on it except for the people they invited. So they used the high profile nature of these former athletes to get these people, oh, you could go play poker with Chauncey Billups, but except the mafia and Chauncey Billups were all in on it and were basically stealing from all these people.
Yeah. You have a little bit of the announcement this morning. They made a major announcement with Kash Patel, I think, was there. wearing his FBI jacket. And I mean, this is huge because it does, as Albert has just noted, and Albert is, we call him the commish because he is our commissioner of sports. It does involve the Cosa Nostra. I mean, it involves the mob. Go ahead, Albert. Here's a little bit of the announcement. You can see those watching on YouTube. You can see that's Kash Patel in his blue FBI jacket alongside those who are involved with the legal proceedings and charges that will be brought against.
Now, I would like to turn to the other case, United States versus Aiello, the rigged poker game case. Beginning as early as 2019, the defendants in this case orchestrated a scheme to use wireless cheating technology to run rigged poker games across the United States, including in the Hamptons, Las Vegas, Miami, and Manhattan. The scheme targeted victims known as, quote, fish, who were often lured to participate in these rigged games by the chance to play alongside former professional athletes who were known as, quote, face cards. The so-called face cards included the defendant, Chauncey Billups, who at the time of the scheme was a former NBA player and is currently the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, and also Damon Jones, a former NBA player and coach. What the victims, the fish, didn't know is that everybody else at the poker game, from the dealer to the players, including the face cards, were in on the scam. Once the game was underway, the defendants fleeced the victims out of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars per game. The defendants used a variety of very sophisticated cheating technologies, some of which were provided by other defendants in exchange for a share of the profits from the scheme. For example, they used off-the-shelf shuffling machines that had been secretly altered in order to read the cards in the deck, predict which player at the table had the best poker hand, and relay that information to an off-site operator. The off-site operator sent the information via cell phone back to a co-conspirator at the table, and that person at the table was known as the quarterback. The quarterback then signaled secretly the information he had received from others to others at the table, and together they used that information in order to win their games and to cheat the victims.
I guess there was millions of dollars involved. You know, I mean,
Ooh, it's a wild idea, but it just might work.
I mean, it's a really complicated system. That, you know, they with X-rays, and then there's a Confederate who can see it, and then radios back or whatever it may be. But I mean, when you're dealing with millions of dollars, I guess it's worth having that kind of complexity laid over it. It's pretty amazing that there's so many participants, and it's always interesting to me when people are, and these NBA players are all very well compensated, right? I mean, they're gazillionaires, and yet they're involved in some kind of illegal poker thing. Like they have to, I mean, how much could you be? Let's assume they can make a couple extra million a year doing this. Just seems like it seems like a grift you don't need. You know?
Isn't it though they find a weakness and they exploit it and they say, okay, you do this for us or we do this to you, and the you know, it's the mob way, right? So maybe even if they didn't want to do it or didn't need the money, they are pushed into it because
it's a fair point that with the mob involved, you never know exactly, you know, who's leaning on who. How long until Trump pardons them all? Thank you, Wendy. That's exactly. I mean, it's so true. There seems to be, you know, if you're a celebrity and you have any connection to Trump and you say something nice, you will get your pardon. But it's extraordinary. Gambling, debt to the mob. It is true. Also, the last thing I would say to you, Commissioner, maybe you can maybe say a thing or two about this, but the NBA, first professional sport to embrace gambling on the sport. That is to say, you know, there's always been this kind of radioactivity about gambling and mentioning gambling around sports, but the NBA went with it. They said, hey, it's okay. You can bet on this sport.
Yeah, they were the first ones in a couple. I remember Atlanta and a couple other locations where live betting is allowed. They actually were allowed that to happen in arenas. And it started with the NBA, and then it branched out. You see it all over. Like ESPN News now might as well just be a gambling web, like a service. Like I used to watch that a lot as a kid growing up. Now it's just lines 24/7 and betting. But it starts with that, and there's the Damon. They mentioned other players, Damon Jones and Terry Rozier. They're also part of a separate investigation where they're actually influencing the games. So we'll see what happens with them on top of this whole mafia stuff as well.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned Arenas. Gil Arenas is mentioned in all of this, isn't he? Already, he's an NBA player, right? I believe he's mentioned in some of this as well.
I mean, he was the guy who brought a gun to the locker room and had that whole controversy. I think there's a great thing on Netflix about him too, but a lot of controversy around. I'm sure there's a lot more people and a lot more names that will be coming up.
He's the only one I actually have played poker with, but it was at a very small game. It was like, you buy in for a few, maybe $1,000, but it was a few hundred.
He knows he's a crazy guy and he's a fun guy and he just leans into it. So I'm sure he'll just like laugh this off and just kind of move on.
Were you the fish, Mark? You were the fish.
I was the fish. By the way, I am the fish for, I believe I'm so bad at poker that even if you told me, hey, don't worry, the game's all fixed, I know somehow I'm going to end up losing still. Even though don't worry, we're only going after, no, somehow I know I'm going to end up losing here. That, my friends, is Law and Disorder.
Tune in again next time for more Law and Disorder on the Mark Thompson Show.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. Hey, let's be careful out there.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah, Mark the Fish Thompson was my the name I went by.
You went by Joe Fish. Joe Fish.
Joe Fish. Where is my Joe Fish? Come on,
Anthony.
Oh my gosh, I don't know where my Joe Fish is. Where is it?
I hate when that comes to me after the segment because we could have definitely used that during the whole.
Joe Fish, Sal the Shoemaker, Joe Box, and Little Anthony.
That's it, right? Those are the guys we needed. Joe Box.
I mean, Chauncey Billups' name sounds right along with all of them. Not a nickname, but. Very cool name indeed.
Too good.
They are kissing my ass.
I'll bet they are already looking for those pardons. How long before the Trump marquee name is displayed in neon lights over the White House when he renames it the Trump White House by executive order, says Luis for the $5 super chat. Thank you. Look, I'll just say this quickly about the construction at the White House. Not approved. There is history at the White House. It wasn't designed to be the nicest residence in Washington, the grandest residence in Washington. It was to actually have a sort of muted quality, given the fact that it is the people's house. So the palatial aspects of the build-out and the gold-encrusted oval and everything he's done within the White House isn't consistent with the general ethos, the philosophy behind this place that is supposed to be the people's house. Now, that said, there have been modifications to the White House through the years, but the teardown of the East Wing without any kind of approval from any of those people associated with sort of maintaining the historical apparatus that is deciding what's appropriate, what's not, don't touch this doorway, don't touch this window, etc. That's all been populated by people who, again, are loyalists to Donald Trump. So he gets the green light wherever he goes. So when you say, doesn't somebody have to approve this? Yeah, but the somebody is, again, a toady of the Trump people. So I don't think from what we've seen in all the reporting, any kind of formal approval was sought. But even had they sought formal approval, as I say, it just would have come. It should be called the Epstein East Wing. Thank you, Uncle Scrooge. Very funny. Jim Slayton says, Trump's most honest post yet, the AI video of him crapping on U.S. citizens. Yeah, that was a while. I just couldn't imagine what he was thinking. Thanks, Jim, for that super chat. Lucy McAllister, you are so generous and really supportive of the show. It's why you are my favorite McAllister.
Kim, how are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there another McAllister? Oh, Kim is also a McAllister. Lucy, you are, I don't want to say, look, it's not a competition, okay? So when I say you're my favorite company, it's not a competition, but I I will say, if it were a competition, you would win. That is my point. Lucy McAllister, my favorite McAllister, thank you for a $20 super sticker. Really means a lot, and we really appreciate all the support. If he donates it to the White House rebuilding, Beth Farmer says, of the $230 million for him being wrongly put through so much, we pay for the dance hall, and he gets a fat tax break. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's another point. When you say, I'll put it maybe to the ballroom, first of all, he's not going to. He's going to go right into his pockets. This is all ridiculous. It's a grift. He's taking 200. This is a remarkable grift that you could sue your own government and you approve a $230 million payout for a legal case that you were not acquitted of. You were not acquitted of the charges involving these various things to which he's referred. The documents case, the Russia thing, there is no acquittal. Anyway, the idea somehow that you could then donate that and deduct it, yeah, that's so consistent. Thank you, Beth Farmer. That's brilliant. I think that's exactly what we're talking about. The presidential bunker is supposedly under the East Wing. Yeah, that's right. It was originally, I believe, there is an operations center under the East Wing. I'm sure some allowance has been made for that to be relocated, or perhaps it's still there. The East Wing is generally the First Lady's area. It's the least, if you want to feel better about this at all, it's the least historic of the blueprint associated with the White House. The least. All right. I got to move along. I've got Nathan waiting, but thank you guys, and we're still reading and digesting all of your thoughts, super chats, super stickers. So thank you guys. Been super generous, and I appreciate it.
The Mark Thompson Show.
One thing that's happening within the Trump administration that I'll just make a note of is that Donald Trump is elevating a lot of 2020 election deniers to positions that are associated with the federal government monitoring elections. So it's kind of a setup for elections to be manipulated or at least handled in such a way so as to favor the GOP and Trump-related causes. More on that as we continue, but one of the breakthrough pieces of research statistically is being done by the Election Truth Alliance and the guy who's been on the show a few times, I think, with legitimate revelations, stuff that should at least give you cause for pause. So you can reject this, you can circumspectly look at this and decide for yourself. But I love the way he, in this dispassionate way, he's just a very, just the facts ma'am guy, comes on and shares with us the latest from Election Truth Alliance. This is the great Nathan Taylor. Hi, Nathan.
Hello, thanks. You had me waiting in the wings. So here
I'm sorry, my friend. Thank you for your patience, and I'll let you just get started because I know you've got stuff from Florida.
Oh yeah. Well, you actually brought up with the whole casino mafia gambling something interesting. We talked about using machines or electronics to manipulate results. As you said, you had potential card shuffling machines that were rigging, shuffling and rigging the deck a little bit. People being potentially blackmailed to help do it or cover it up. And I find all of those things very interesting because it further highlights, can we trust electronics and systems to not only, count our cards, but count our elections? And how do we verify? So you've had me on a few times. I think in the past, we've talked about some of our findings in Nevada and Pennsylvania. Now we've brought to you some recent preliminary analysis for Florida. We've also actually recently released some concerns for Minnesota, which was won by Harris, but we're still finding some interesting things there. But I did want to highlight, like I always do, and you bring it up, is what the ETA is doing is what I'm doing. I'm one of the executive directors of the Election Truth Alliance. My background's in cybersecurity information systems, both civilian and military. And is this election denial? Are we questioning the outcome of elections? And does bringing up the concerns and the facts right now, does that stop people from voting in the midterms? So I did want to address that. And I wanted to say a few things. Well, one, as we always like to say, there is never harm in doing audits and double checking. As we said, we audit, our finances, our banks, we audit, engineering, production to make sure things are quality tested. There should never be harm in a second look, a second opinion, a second check. And if people don't want that, questions are like, democracy is the most important thing, in my opinion. Counting the votes and making sure the votes are counted correctly is that's a cornerstone of American democracy. And I don't think anyone should push back against the harm in making sure that our votes are counted correctly the first time around, and we address any problems as they come up. So,
well, I should also say that perhaps with the most consequential election in American history, it's fair to ask a question or two, and at least, as you say, just to do a general audit. I mean, before anybody's throwing any accusations anywhere, it's simply an audit. Give us access to the information, and we move on. So that's one of the things I like, as I was saying, kind of in preparation for you coming on. I just like the dispassionate way, the unemotional, statistically underpinned way in which you reach your conclusions. So go ahead.
Yeah. And two flags as well when it comes to audits is we do in the U.S., depending on states, there are some types of audits before or after the elections. And what the ETA has started bringing up as we investigate the statistical concerns, but also those audit reports, we are worried that those audits may not be sufficient in catching some of the things we're flagging now. And that's why we want these second audits. We pretty much want to go to the counties and the precincts that look strange, and we want to focus on those. We want, hand count investigations there. We want that second independent audit. And I'll jump right into the concerns. And I've tried to make this PowerPoint. I know when you first brought me on, we could sit here for 30 minutes to an hour talking slides. I've tried to make this pretty short and pretty simple for you. So please, at any point, ask questions or jump in. But let's see if we can bring up the Florida PowerPoint here. I may have to have you guys throw it up on the screen. There it is. Here's Florida. Pretty simple. So as I said, Election Truth Alliance, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, founded in December. We've been investigating not only the 24 election, but any special or intermediary elections since then. And we've been publishing our findings. And actually, recently, we started talking about this. Not only have we been using statistics to determine if there's any red flags, but we've been on the ground in some of these swing states and some of these non-swing states investigating the counties that are coming up as anomalous. And we will continue to make some of those on-the-ground findings public as we go forward. We're just now starting to talk about and release some of the on-the-ground findings in Florida. And by the end of this week, we'll have even more, and then we'll actually get into some of the legal things. And I'll touch base just at the end about some of the legal implications for those on-the-ground investigations. I do want to flag statistical analysis of elections is not proof of election fraud. It is at best evidence, but it tells you where to look. And if you start to find a bunch of red flags, it warrants investigation. Okay, so to keep things very simple, you've seen some of our charts before. We've done heat maps. We've done other types of things. This is a scatter plot. You may have seen this on our some of our reports. If not, we have reports at electiontruthealliance.org. We've done 3 different swing states. We've done a handful of non-swing states. And one of the most common formats we use is a scatter plot. And this is just precinct voting results across a county or multiple counties. And the reason I bring this up is we are, based on the expert and peer-reviewed work of election fraud detectors that have looked at Russian elections in Europe, and even some experts in the U.S., they flagged that a normal election should look a bit more like what we're going to show you. Should have a normal distribution. It should be, when we do it at a scatter plot and we do, the amount of votes you're getting or the vote share you're getting versus the turnout across precincts, it should be more of a straight line. And that's what we're going to actually show and show some of what Florida looks like in comparison. But the reason I bring this up is if you look at the graph on the right, we have labeled here a normal election pattern. This is a scatter plot of this is, a generated one. So this would be every precinct in the county. The x-axis is turnout. That just means I got 100 registered voters, 50 show up to vote during the election.
Did we lose him? Or have you lost me?
Nathan,
there we go.
Are you there?
Okay.
Hello. You guys good? Am I here?
Yeah. The x-axis you were saying? Go ahead.
So, any questions so far on
no, but you were
what
saying,
we're looking
I'm
at?
sorry, I missed you. So you were saying 100 turnout. You were just explaining. The x-axis is simple. Let's say 100. Yeah, go ahead.
No worries. So the x-axis is turnout. And since these are precincts and every dot is a precinct, for example, if you've got 100 registered voters and 50 of them vote, that's 50% turnout. They'd be, somewhere at the 50% line. That's how you read these graphs. And then it's just the percentage of the votes. So if you get 50% of the votes, you're going to be at the 50% on the y-axis, above or below that. So nonetheless, the reason why we highlight it this way is this is a good method to show if there's any abnormal voting patterns. And on the right, we have an example of what we argue based on the work of these election experts abnormal could look like. For example, there should be no relationship between how many people show up to vote and how much of the vote a candidate is getting across multiple precincts. It should be, as I said, generally what you'll see is both candidates are going to sit at a average vote share at low turnout, medium turnout, and high turnout. If you see this effect, which is on the right, which means we're seeing that for this candidate, that as turnout increased across these precincts or precincts of higher turnout, more voters showed up or more votes were cast, either or, one candidate begins to disproportionately benefit. That is a red flag for potential vote manipulation. In this case, it could be vote stuffing, either physical or digital. And this is what's been observed and reported in Russian elections multiple times, multiple elections by election experts such as Roman Yudat, Sergei Shpilkin. So, as we said, we know what normal should look like, and we know what abnormal should look like. Now I'm going to actually show you what we've put out recently for 3 counties in Florida. And here that is. This is the first county. This is the most populated county, the more liberal county. This is Miami-Dade. And this is all of the votes, all the vote types for the county. And pretty much what we're showing here is this is the same type of graph. This is a scatter plot. What we see is that across all the precincts in the county, as more votes were cast or more voters turned up to vote, the Republican presidential candidate began to proportionally get more votes across the board. And as we said, this type of effect has been flagged for potential ballot stuffing in Russian elections. And we see the inverse, of course, for the Democratic president. They go down. So this is one way to visualize it. Now I'm going to actually show you a much easier to visualize way, and we can actually start talking about some of the implications.
Before you do that, let me just ask you a question. Why couldn't it be that as voter turnout increases, that just more people come out who are Trump voters?
Yes, we get that question a lot. So here's the problem with this effect, and we'll actually show it even more precisely in a second graph. The problem we're finding is that, as we said before, per the work of experts, there should be no relationship between the amount of people showing up to vote across all these precincts and the amount of votes you're getting. In other examples, such as we'll show you for mail-in, what we actually see is that both candidates are somewhat consistent across all voter turnout. So precincts of low turnout, precincts of high turnout, the average amount of votes they're getting across all of those precincts in those percentages is somewhat consistent.
Okay.
And so in order to create this effect normally, well, it would be arguably impossible to create this effect normally by voters being engaged, because in order for you to get specific precincts that as more people turn out to vote, more votes are just for one candidate, there's no way for voters to know the amount of turnout in their precinct during the election. They can't, you can't really engage certain groups of people to do this well. And that's where we're flagging almost algorithmic or some type of systematic manipulation, because it's too persistent. It's too consistent across all of these different ranges of turnout. And we're actually going to show it to you here again. Okay. And these are the other 2 counties. We're seeing the same effects. This is Palm Beach and St. Lucie. I believe Palm Beach was still won by Harris, but we still see this effect in that county, and then St. Lucie as well. Now, one thing I didn't really touch on too much, but as we said, with concerns about machines and counting and how you could potentially manipulate them, these 3 counties specifically, 2 of them use ES&S, which is a major voting system used all across the U.S., and the other is Dominion system, which is the second top one. We can talk a little bit more about that at the end. There's been some changes to Dominion recently. Okay, now I'm going to show you what I personally like, and these are the same data set. We've just put them in bits. So now, instead of you just looking at a bunch of dots on a graph and lines, we've put them in percentages. And these are the same data. On the left is a binning graph, same turnout on the x-axis, same vote share on the y-axis, but we've just put them all in bins by 10%. And then on the right, we've done the same technique, but instead of it being by set 10%, we said, let's put them in weighted bins. So you've got, for example, 200 and, a little bit more than 200,000 votes per bin. And that takes out a lot of the noise. Now, explain to me what effect we're seeing on the left here. What do you think this looks like?
It looks like, at least from a turnout standpoint, you've got a very good turnout for Kamala Harris that exceeds that of the Trump turnout. If I'm seeing this properly, I got to blow this up.
Yes. So what we're seeing, to kind of put it in words, I know you've got some listeners. We have a graph here with multiple bins ranging on the left from 30% turnout all the way up to around 90%. And it's in sets of 10. And what we're seeing is that below 60, 70% turnout, Harris has a majority of votes across these precincts. So all of the precincts below 60, 70% turnout, Harris has a majority of the votes. Above that 60, 70% turnout, we see a flip. And Trump begins to then dominate those higher turnout locations from I think it's somewhere around 65, 67% to 70 to 80%.
I mean, you really see that on the right-hand side of the graph. You really see it dramatically.
Yes, and so on the right-hand side, what we've done, as I said, is we've weighted these so that, for example, on the left, you have some turnout percentages that don't have a huge amount of precincts, and it's going to create a lot of noise or inconsistency. On the right, this is another technique of visualizing any changes. They're weighted so that we have an equal amount of votes across all of these bins, and we get to see any major changes clearly. And what we see is it's the same effect. The x-axis is just shifted a little bit, 0 to 66%. We're seeing Harris is getting a good amount of the votes. Above that point, that is when Trump begins to overtake Harris and begins to win across all of those higher turnout precincts. Now, the reason this is a concern is, as we said, and as we'll show you with mail-in, we have yet to determine a reasonable way that voters could do this, because there is not a way for a voter to know what their turnout engagement is going to be, nor is there really a way to mobilize voters so that only at 66% and higher precincts of turnout does all the Republicans show up. It doesn't. If you're going to mobilize your voter base, they're going to show up across all turnout percentages, and you're going to have more votes. All right. Any questions on this?
No, but it still lingers the point that I think I could make, which is, I get it. So more voters turned out, and those were Trump voters. Maybe they were voters who had never voted before. Maybe they were animated by some anger at Biden or whatever it was. But as we point to more and more of the voter turnout reflecting votes for Trump, couldn't it be that just Trump voters turned out in big numbers?
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, it could be.
But you're saying, but let me. Yeah. So I don't mean to answer my own question, but I'm kind of just trying to summarize and make sure I understand your point. But your point is, sure, Mark, that is possible, but it would defy the normal kinds of mix of voting that you would find. I mean, you just wouldn't find in a normal voting pattern the kind of surge for one candidate that we saw. Is that essentially the point?
Yeah, it's pretty much, to put it in layman's terms, theoretically, you could do this. But to do this consistently across multiple counties, where all of those counties you see the same effects of 60% turnout and higher going to one candidate, it begins to lean into the level of non-human voting behavior.
Okay.
And as I said, once you start seeing that consistency across multiple different counties, different voters, it just becomes a little too much. It's a red flag. And that's why we want these investigations, and really we want answers. And as I said, this is all of the vote types, by the way. So what we do have for you next is we do have mail-in voting. And as I said as well, we'll come back to that. I don't want to get to that just yet. All right, mail-in voting. Oh, don't get ahead of me. Okay. So mail-in voting, right? So as we said, why is it, and this is where, you can have good pushback. Well, we brought this up for Pennsylvania. We brought this up for Nevada. We started seeing, the same concerns in North Carolina. Why is it that mail-in voting looks statistically like what we would expect and what has been held up as a more normal human voting behavior by election experts. So why is it that mail-in exhibits the effect that we argue is more normal, where both candidates have a somewhat consistent amount of the votes across all turnout? And that's what we see here, right? You see that Harris, from low turnout of 0% and above precincts, so 0 to 15 and all the way up to around 35, because mail-in is at most 35% of some of these precincts, we see that across all of these precincts, Harris is getting closer to that 55 to 60% of the vote, and Trump that inverse in the remaining amount. And we don't see a huge and consistent change for any precinct thresholds or levels. And as I said, this is what we would expect to see. So why is it that mail-in looks like this, but election day and early voting, depending on what types of voting they have? So in Pennsylvania, election day, North Carolina, early voting and election day, why are we seeing the opposite effects? And we're seeing it almost an effect of a certain turnout threshold and above begins to benefit one candidate. And that's where we're flagging this needs to be investigated. We need to go to these places that are exhibiting these effects, and we need to actually hand count and audit and make sure that this isn't this, as I said, this could be some, unique, very interesting effects, but it's too consistent and it flags for the same type of vote manipulation being seen in Russian elections. And I think, as I quoted before, they were actually seeing in 2011 Russian elections where turnout of, I think, 80 to 90% does the flip. So that's where the pro-Russian or pro-Russian government party begins to get a huge amount of the votes, is 80 to 90%, and it jumps up. Okay. Any questions here? Any thoughts on, mail-in? And
no, it's fascinating. The mail-in really is telling, isn't it? Now, again, you could say, well, Democrats use the mail-in more than typical GOP voters, and that's the reason that Kamala Harris had such a good showing in the mail-in part of the tabulation. I suppose that I'm trying to think of pushback, potential pushback.
Yeah,
but again,
as I said,
you would still say that you would still say though that the dispersal of votes, the way in which they're distributed, would have a more natural kind of view in-person voting than and in some way reflect what was happening with the mail-in.
Yeah, we would expect to see. I mean, even if if a candidate is really popular for election day, we would expect to just see this effect, just whatever candidate is more popular, getting more of the votes. We wouldn't expect to see any change at a set turnout. Now,
sure, exactly. That's the reason the mail. But I just want to put underscore it for myself. Maybe the reason the mail-in's important and instructive is because it shows you the votes were there for Kamala Harris in Florida. So as you look at that turnout surge and it's all going for Trump, you think to yourself, well, wait a minute. I mean, how can the mail-in be so reflective of one thing and yet the in-person reflective of another? So it again, as you say, it feels red flaggy.
Yeah. And for a lot of these places, you're dividing votes across 3 different types of voting. And one thing we do want to flag is mail-in seems to have a little more strict security and process, right? You've got, I know North Carolina alone, you have to have either witnesses or notary when you send your mail-in vote. You have to pre-register. They have to send the ballot to you and get it back. So there's a bit more of a verification process. Election day early voting, you're just going in person and you're voting on the system there. And so I'm going to show you this. I know we're running a little low on time, but here's the thing I wanted to show you. And as we talked about before, so on the left is those 3 counties we talked about summed up for Florida. On the right is Pennsylvania, all of the precincts across all of the counties. And remember what we talked about. It's concerning that you would see the same effect across multiple locations, multiple demographics. And we're seeing the same effects in Pennsylvania, where precincts of lower than 65, 72%, it's a little higher of a threshold for turnout, but we see that effect as well, right? 0 to 65%, Harris is getting majority of the votes. After 65 to 72%, we see that close, and then Trump begins to take over from 72% and higher turnout across all of these precincts, and his average vote share is sitting closer to that 60%. And it's the same effect we're seeing in Florida. It's the same effect we're seeing in North Carolina and some concerns. And really, it brings up the question of why would you see the same effect consistently across multiple counties and multiple states when they are different regionally speaking, but they all use the same voting systems? And so that's why, as we said, we're going to keep releasing these types of investigations, but we have now, as we said, we've started doing on the ground investigations. We're going to these places where we're seeing these effects. We're looking at the systems and the voter registration databases that are used here. And we will continue to make public the problems we are starting to find. And the last little piece I'll throw at you then is everyone says, well, as we brought up and we've said time and time again, and people don't seem to be, fully aware of kind of how our voting system works in our elections. 70 to 80% of the votes as of 24 are hand-marked paper ballots. We use hand-marked paper ballots all across the U.S. We don't use a lot of the voting machines. Those are smaller. Now, what's interesting is even those hand-marked paper ballots are not hand-counted. They are machine-counted. They are counted by an optical scanner. Almost 100% of the votes are. And so we bring up that concern because we're saying even though people hand mark their votes and cast them, they are still counted by machines.
Sure. It's not the voting, it's the counting.
It's the counting. It's not who votes that counts. It's who counts the votes. Exactly. And so, as I said, we're not making any accusations against these companies. We're just flagging that they do these top three systems, ES&S, Dominion, and Hard Intercivic. They span a majority of the swing states, the non-swing states. And if a malicious third-party actor could compromise these systems, these are a common link across all of the places we've started to find these statistical red flags and anomalies. So
I want to, because you mentioned these systems, let's spend a second on what's just happened with Dominion voting systems, okay, Nathan? Because I mentioned, we covered it on the show the other day, but it bears mentioning as an adjunct to what you've been talking about.
Yeah, so Dominion, one of the second largest voting system in the U.S. I know they span a few different states. I know they span Nevada pretty aggressively. They have both tabulation machines that do optical scanning at like the precinct level, and then they have voting machines where you go and you cast your vote.
I think they're in 27 states is what I recall, but maybe you have.
And they do have, some of the counties will be like, predominantly ES&S state, but then there'll be some Dominion counties. They're pretty mixed in. And yes, they were recently purchased by another entity and relabeled as Liberty Voting, I believe. So what are your concerns about that? I can't talk too much about the implications. But...
Well, my concern, I can say this. I mean, you're the dispassionate, unemotional statistician, but I can just tell you, I'm the wildly emotional, panicked guy who is looking at a company and a technology that's been purchased by someone who is a very strong GOP advocate and ally of Donald Trump. And so one worries that these systems that are used are not impartial any longer. They are owned by entities and people with a clear political agenda. And that's my concern.
So I will say two things. First and foremost, the ETA has brought up multiple times the concerns of should the companies that own our voting systems be connected or partisan in nature at all, right? Should they not be nonpartisan? Should they be, using open source systems? So right now, most people aren't aware, our voting systems are proprietary. They're owned by the companies. They're audited by a select few groups. And outside of that, there's not a lot known about how these systems work or run until you really are able to get in and access them. I will highlight, as the ETA has been investigating these systems more, there are some concerns coming up with the 24 election where one of the companies that audits Dominion, Hard Intercivic, NES, or at least ES&S and Dominion that get audited specifically by this company, that's ProVNV. There were software updates that do raise some red flags. And I think multiple entities have reported on this. I know Smart Elections have reported on this. I know Newsweek has talked about this. But these software updates, from our understanding so far, may have made changes to some of these systems that may have weakened some of the security practices, such as flagging or alarming if there's any changes to the source code. And so these systems were updated software-wise. It was de minimis, meaning you didn't recertify the machines. You didn't have to check them again. And I think that update came out just before November. And it's things like this that we say, we definitely believe that there should be a second look at how these systems are ran, who runs them. And at the end of the day, I think the final piece that I really like to bring up a lot is we've had examples of a malicious compromise of hardware and software before. We had Volkswagen in 2015 with Dieselgate, right? Where they got caught because they were cheating emissions testing. They were being audited and passing their audits, but the data was not adding up. There was too high emissions for what was being reported. So what did you do? You went and you said, well, let's test the systems in use, or let's test the end result, which for us is going to be looking at the physical balance that people cast. For Dieselgate was driving the vehicle on the highway and testing the emissions then. So these are just things we bring up. And at the end of the day, we want people to be confident our elections are free and fair and safe and secure. We want to improve our election practices. And we want to make sure that if there is a compromise, we need to investigate it now so that it can be handled and made public before the midterms, when I feel like a lot of Americans are going to be engaged and are going to vote. And the implications for the midterms and the next presidential election are very large.
Sure. Of course, that's true. Quickly, George Hunt with a $5 super chat says, no one to blame but the people, the stolen election machines that voted for him. Now everyone is afraid to stand up to him, just as we knew it would be. Yeah, well, that may be. The Dominion voting machine sold to the Republican donor. Yep, we covered that. So they've collected a lot of data, says Randy. What impact is all of this going to have for the 2026 or 2028 elections? Anything?
Yeah. So I'll say this. As I said, we're limited in what we can say right now. My lawyers, I'm very tight-lipped. But I will say this. The ETA is not only publishing these findings and having these conversations, but here in the near future, we're going to make public our on-the-ground investigations and the legal actions that will be coming from them. Some of the problems we're finding is we're finding evidence of a potential compromise of some of the voter registration databases used across some of these states that are very impactful. We're also, as we said, concerned about the systems in the machines. We found mismatching reports from, the counties themselves and their data, and some other things as well. So I would say this as we go forward, right? It's mostly about, as the ETA makes more of this public, really what we need the states to start doing these investigations as well. We need governors and the secretaries of states to get on board, to come to the table. We need them to start looking at their systems, because once we make public some of our findings, the implication isn't just in the place that we're having these problems. It could be anywhere and everywhere these systems were used.
And we have a state-centric election system, obviously, so that's why you need the states to get involved. Randy also asking, is Mark suggesting that Harris could have won Florida? I don't know. We didn't come to that conclusion here. I just was...
As of right now, the ETA hasn't made any public statements there. Yeah. As I said, though, we are investigating the rest of the counties in Florida, and we will have some estimates as we go forward. I will flag that it is very interesting this effect is happening, and it does bring up concerns that if some of the bluest counties in Florida were impacted, and it is vote manipulation, those counties could have their results changed, and we'll see what the full scale will look like as we go forward. I will flag one other thing is we've been investigating not only the presidential election, but some of these down ballot races as well that have raised red flags. So some of these Senate races, some of these House races, and we will be making those findings public as we go forward as well. And then we can have those conversations.
On data distribution, we get this. Nathan, CC Ryder says, show me a graph for the last 10 general elections compared to 2024 for an accurate sample set. When you show which you did, the disbursement, the heat map, and various things that you've shown as to a normal dispersal of votes and an abnormal dispersal of votes, et cetera, are you comfortable with, and can you address her concern about the idea that the sample size has to be significant so that the statistics are significant as well?
Yeah, this comes up a lot. I've heard a few people, bring up the law of large numbers. We're actually working on kind of a public statement and address about that. We've got, some PhD statisticians that are, batting around the language and how to talk about it. But I will say this, I would say that the ETA is very confident that the data sets we have for using all of the precincts in a county is pretty sufficient in getting a good picture of, some of the trends in voting behaviors. And, you actually see, and what we've shown a few times is we see high variation and lower turnout because you have less votes. But we're still seeing what we argue is, a concerning effect, even in places where there isn't a huge amount of votes. We're going to places that have the most amount of votes per precincts, and we're finding this effect there. So there is no bigger data set than some of the most populated counties in the state. So we're pretty confident, as we said, that these are some alarming concerns. We make this public, right? We make our reports public. The data is public. We also put this data up on our dashboards after we verify it so that you guys can go and you can look at it yourselves and you can peer review it and raise any flags if you think there's inaccuracy there. But as I said, we've done this analysis to multiple swing states and multiple non-swing states, and we're finding this effect pretty consistently in places that are alarming, and we're not seeing this effect as much in mail-in. And we have looked at past elections for both the 2020 election. We even have data sets going back to 2016, a little earlier. We do plan on making a bit more of that public as we go, and we can have those conversations as well as how does that change and how does it compare?
At minimum, it's provocative and perhaps it's insanely alarming. Election Truth Alliance, you can find them. You can knock around on the website, nonprofit, nonpartisan. And Nathan, you always bring it. You bring the receipts. People can believe them. People can question them. People can talk about the data set. They can talk about the sample size. But you do bring it and you lay it out so beautifully. And I really appreciate you spending time with us always. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. As I said, we'll have some more stuff coming out here in the near future. I'd love to talk through that when we get to that point.
Love for you to come
last
back.
piece.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we'll have a link to Election Truth Alliance under this video. Go ahead.
It'll be big, and I feel like the last thing we start bringing up and we keep talking about now that I think people understand is it's like democracy is not going to defend itself, right? Like we got to be engaged, we got to ask questions, and I really think at the end of the day, as we make more of this public, it is worth our time to make sure our elections are free, fair, safe, and secure as we go forward. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, bravo. Here. Thanks. Election Truth Alliance. See you again, Nathan. Nathan Taylor. So long, my friend.
Feel it in your soul. The Mark Thompson Show.
Right on. I mean, it's provocative. You can throw it back, and you can. This is the problem, and I'm seeing it in the chat on some level, that somehow if you question the election results, you have thrown yourself into the conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiracy theorist on much of anything. I mean, I don't believe the official line on a lot of stuff, but I also don't believe in these complex conspiracy theories. I mean, from landing on the moon to, whatever it might be, fill in your conspiracy theory. But I also say this, just because you're a conspiracy theorist doesn't mean that there wasn't actually a conspiracy. In other words, sometimes conspiracy theorists have the right thing. Now, I wouldn't say this is a conspiracy theory per se, but you can label it anything you want. I would suggest that there is a reasonable question. It was asked by the Republicans. Why can't Democrats ask the same thing? Or why can't just independents, well-meaning independents, Americans, ask the same questions about the legitimacy of an election and an election count? So I think there was a radioactivity, sort of a sense that I don't want to bring this up because it now puts me in the category of an election denier, like the crazy MAGA crew. And I think that's sort of the way the Democrats felt after the election, and that kept them from asking for a recount in states. And the reality is that the election tallies were just outside the recount thresholds where you would be compelled statistically, based on the count, to have a recount dictated. So you'd have to pay for a recount, but getting that money for a recount wouldn't have been hard. Take some of that money you spent to get Beyonce to show up to whatever fundraiser, and that money could pay for the recount. So all I'm trying to say is that I think questions about this are legitimate, and you don't have to embrace it. You can say it's all crap, and this makes us look bad, and how come we're questioning things? Really? That it makes us look bad? I don't know who the us is. What, Americans? Are we just supposed to say, oh, that was the count? Yep, of course. Okay, I believe it. Right. Just like I believe all the other official crap that's coming out of this administration. Yeah, I believe those are narco-terrorists driving those boats off the coast of Venezuela. Yep, if that said so, great. I don't want to question it. I don't see why questioning it is a bad thing. I get it. Oh, he has to leave earlier. David Katz should leave earlier. So I can't blither on anymore? Is that what you're telling me? Gosh, I don't know.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
What they do.
They do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they
I'm
do it for.
trying to make a point, and then Kim comes in and says you got to go to Katz right away because he's got to take off. My God. All right.
The Mark Thompson Show.
This guy is one of the great legal analysts in the English-speaking world, the former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney in Southern California, the great one. He is David Katz. David,
great to be with you.
We are taking you places you never thought you'd go before. Did you ever think a president who was never formally acquitted of charges that were brought against him for retention of documents and collusion with the Russians, all of these different things, frauds of all sort, the fraudulent claims associated with that New York case. Did you ever think that that president would sue the government that he would then become president of and be able to, with the sweep of a pen, approve whatever damages he claims, in this case it's $230 million, and be able to just pocket that money? It's a grift of a sort I never thought we could even conceive of. Give me the legal X's and O's of that, oh great one, David Katz.
Well, let me just say first, you always ask me, Mark, how do I practice law with the amount of media that I do in the United Kingdom and across America? By the way, if you don't mind a plug, I'm going to be on News Nation tomorrow, Pacific time. Really serious show that they do, either at 1:30 or 2:30 or maybe both. Probably talking about these circuit court decisions and the Supreme Court. So I think that for your audience that has some time tomorrow, News Nation, 1:30 or 2:30 Pacific time. But to answer your question, how do I do? I was going to have to leave early today, but now I don't because my criminal court hearing was continued. That's an expression we use that means postponed. It was continued about an hour and a half ago, and so I can stay until as long as you'd like.
That's very, very good.
As long as you'd like
David, let me then, Counselor, ask you, what do you make of the President of the United States claiming that he is entitled to damages for the harassment that he received as a result of the court cases brought by governments of the United States? I say governments, meaning it was both state government and federal government, that Trump endured during his time away from office. Now that he is president, he wants $230 million.
Well, this is a SNL sketch. A sketch. This is not something that you would ever think could actually happen. There's a famous old Woody Allen movie, I think from the late 60s, where he's the attorney and he's also the witness, and he runs back and forth between the lectern where the lawyer is and the witness box. And it's very funny because he's got on both hats, but it's actually, well, this is it. Even Trump said, wow, I just sued myself and I guess I approved the settlement. Well, it doesn't really look good. Well, of course it doesn't look good. It's self-dealing in the worst sense, in the worst imaginable way. The way we got here was that there are these administrative remedies, Mark. And so the idea is let's not clutter the court if a fair-minded Justice Department or some other administrative agency would simply recognize that there was a violation of the law and they would simply pay damages. As a lawyer who actually practices day in and day out, all these administrative remedies are usually a joke, Mark. All they do is delay you. They're a trap for the unwary. When you do go to court, you haven't exhausted your administrative remedies. You haven't dotted this I and crossed that T. But he's, of course, turned it on his head, as he always does. Instead of it being for everyone else, actually a slowdown and a means to just deny your claim and waste your time. That's the reality. When you go to the Department of Justice and you say, oh, I think that the prosecutor violated my client's civil rights, they roll their eyes, delay your thing, and then you can eventually go to court and try to make that claim. Many of these claims are very difficult to bring, Mark, because there's this qualified immunity that we've blasted. But of course, qualified immunity protects the government workers and the government system. The fact that you're even acquitted doesn't mean that your rights were violated. That's the beauty of our system. If they don't have enough evidence, you get acquitted. But we have what we call the American rule, not the British rule, which means that in a criminal case, basically, in any case, you pay your own lawyer. The British rule is more that the losing party pays the winning party's lawyer. You can analogize from that the loser in a criminal case, which would be, I guess, the government, where they indict somebody and the person's not found guilty, ought to pay the legal fees of the defendant. But that's not our system. So anyway, Trump has turned all of this on his head. He files an administrative claim. This is actually before he's elected, but he manages to keep this pretty secret. I don't remember this coming out, that he filed it back in the middle of 2024. Of course, Biden and his administration were so scrupulous, they never leaked it. We never knew about it. And now it's about to be acted on. And Trump says, you know, when it's acted on by the Department of Justice to pay me for all these egregious violations of my civil rights, Trump, by being charged in these two federal cases. I think that's what it pertains to, the two federal criminal cases. Yeah, 230 million sounds about right. And they actually are going to try to do this collusive. Talk about that word coming back. This collusive, concocted thing where I guess it's Todd Blanche or maybe Bondi herself will say, yes, I've analyzed this. This is a righteous claim. It's worth $230 million to Trump. Here's where I signed it. And people say this one won't even go to court because the idea is it's an administrative remedy, Mark, short of court. I think if they get anywhere near approving this $230 million or giving any of it to Trump, I think a couple of things will happen. You know, there is going to be an accounting for all of this. And I think Bondi and Todd Blanche, if they're any part of this, are going to lose their bar card, or even worse. You know, John Miller, the attorney general, he went to federal prison under Nixon. That's a real thing for committing crimes, and the statute of limitations would still be in play after Trump's next 3 years. So there's that for them to think about. And I think their bar card, I mean, it's just, let me get this straight. And for Blanche, it's even worse. So Blanche represents Trump as his criminal defense attorney. He comes to be the deputy attorney general. He then pays his former client, to whom he has a duty of loyalty ongoing, pays him $230 million because, after all, it was just and obviously a huge amount of that would be for fees. So I guess Blanche would think, how much can I really, you know, how much have I pocketed on this case? You know,
but that's a big thing. I don't want you to blow by that. I mean, a lot of people
are $50 million in legal fees that were paid.
A handful of people stand to make a lot of money with this. Exactly.
And it may not have been paid yet, Mark. It may not have been paid yet. You know, I don't really have the money. I'm doing this crypto thing. Todd, I'll pay you. I'm down the road. I know I have an obligation to pay you this $50 million for these old invoices of yours. And then he pays the $50 million. Trump's story is that if he gets the $230 million, it has to cross his desk. So his claim will cross his desk, and he will approve his claim to be paid by the taxpayers. But he says to the taxpayers, don't worry about it, because I'll give it to charity. Obvious nonsense. The charity that he used to have was shut down because of its violations of the law and not giving the charitable money to any charity at all. And of course, the main charity that is obsessing Trump right now is paying for his big, beautiful ballroom.
Well, that's not a charity, and I made the same point that you just made yesterday. He defrauded a children's cancer charity, okay? To the point that, as David Katz has just noted, he is barred from doing any charitable work in the state of New York. The
swing voters knew that. The swing voters knew that when he made him the leader of the free world. So
the idea that he would give a penny to charity is totally absurd. He'll pocket that money. That's what I was saying in hour one. The ballroom appears to be, earmarked for payment from Palantir, Meta, Google. A lot of the crypto bros are going to step up and throw. I'm sure Binance is throwing a lot of money at it. They just got he got that big pardon, the CEO of Binance. That's
Mark, can I just say one thing? So many of them are such nerds. They'd be the skunk in the ballroom. They'd be a skunk at a cocktail party. It's just a bribe. It's just another way to take a bribe and to destroy this beautiful old East Wing. That's horrific. That's happening as we speak.
Well, just because you mentioned that, I mean, he is within his legal powers to destroy that East Wing, but he typically needs to get some approvals to do it, David Katz. But as I was noting in the first hour, I don't mean to laugh, but it's so absurd. There are Trump functionaries in every place where he needs approval. So getting approval is not a problem.
This is how it's done in banana republics. Somebody's brother's-in-law in charge, and they stand up there sanctimoniously. If you followed some of these third world countries, they don't just say, I did what the hell I want, go screw yourself. No, they issue a statement. that says this has been approved by such and such an agency. I went through some process, all this kind of stuff. Trump is actually not even doing that very well. He's acting more like the stereotype that we have of the strong man in the banana republic who says, I do what the hell I want, go screw yourselves.
Right. This really is true. You're making such an important point here, because I'm seeing, as I've often said, no sleight of hand. Trump is right out front. We will do this because I said we're going to do it. And look, there's no one stopping him. I mean, the leader of the House, Mike Johnson, said, gosh, I don't really know much about what's going on. I know, they have certainly made adaptations and changes historically to the White House. Barack Obama put in a basketball court. They put in a bowling alley, a swimming pool through the years. So I don't really see necessarily why you're giving this president such a hard time.
The bowling alley was underground and not visible. The basketball court was the size of a basketball hoop. Look at this. Just look at it. And, you grew up in Washington, D.C., Mark, and I did for a while. And then I was a law clerk back in Washington, D.C. And, these historic buildings, what a message this sends. All the efforts that we do to preserve historic buildings, the sacrifice that people sometimes have to make because they want to make a profit, which they have a right to do. And we balance off their need to make a profit or their investment against the public's desire to have a beautiful place preserved. And where is the concern for preservation here at all? And
exactly.
The bowling is going to be garish. It's going to be garish and ugly.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it was designed not to be palatial, but to be the people's house. And beyond that, there is history there, as you note. And there were, based on reporting, no historians and those who are, archivists, et cetera, consulted in retaining anything from doorways to windows. All of these things have some historic significance, even allowing for the fact that the East Wing is probably the least historic part of the White House. There's still a lot of history wrapped up in it. And the other thing I'll just say is that as they demolished now the entire East Wing, and this was a promise he made when he was talking about this ballroom, is that none of the White House would be touched. And there in this picture, you see that it is demolished. Now the price for this entire thing, this bloated price to begin with, from $200 million to $300 million. I'm wondering, again, this has to be grift. There is no way you're spending $300 million to build a ballroom. What is that ballroom built of? I mean, it is absurd that you spend $300 million. So I'm suggesting, even in this supposedly privately funded way, there will be money stuck in his pocket. It is a grift.
Private funding of public accommodations like this is a terrible idea. It's an old demagogue's line, where you say, I love my country so much, I'm not even taking my salary. We've heard that from a few presidents. We've heard that from Trump. I love my country so much, I'm not even taking my salary. And then, he doesn't take his, whatever it is, $500,000 salary, if that's even true. And then Trump and his family have already made billions, with a B, billions. And he's only been in office 9 or 10 months. I think that's just the crypto grift. So it's a terrible idea because it's an invitation to bribery. And when they pay for these inaugurals that we don't need to have such huge inaugurals and such money spent on the inaugurals, Mark, that's the problem. What I hope happens with this ballroom is I hope somebody runs to court right away and they get a restraining order, because this is the old thing where the landlord, destroys your property first and then goes and asks for permissions later. This is just an old thing that Trump has done. This is the bad landlord, the abusive landlord in Trump. All right. And he did this, first he made an announcement very publicly that it wasn't going to even be touched. The East Wing was not going to even be touched. And then he came with
it wasn't touched, David. It was demolished. Okay.
And did it. That wasn't the particular semantic nonsense that he relied on. His semantic nonsense now is that as they were just about to do it, they realized that it was much more efficient for the plan to just total the thing, to demolish it completely. And so it just was evolving, like 2 days before it evolved, it was obviously done as a cover up. This is just so I hope that some court will restrain this and say that it had to go through those procedures. And that
this is where your job,
Mark, they say that you can demolish, some technicality, you can demolish, but not build. You need some kind of permission, and you don't need that permission to demolish. I want to see that statute. I want to see the interpretations of that statute, which say that you don't have to ask anybody's approval before demolishing,
well,
just before the new building. I don't believe it.
This is the problem with the law. And now I can say this to a lawyer, a distinguished counsel. The problem is that we've sort of adhered to the law and had a basic understanding that there would be adherence to the law. And so we look to the law and we look to various judicial decisions to, in some way, influence events. I'd suggest respectfully that this crew, under the leadership of this president, who operates really like a mobster, frankly, this is the way, or a king, however you want to put it, an autocrat. He wants something done, and no one will challenge him. Look, I'll go back to the beginning of the administration. It was illegal to have Doge established as some kind of instrument by which there would be a complete trimming of government, sending them into USAID, EPA, IRS, the Treasury Department, and they're firing people. They are getting rid of people. This is not a government organization. They have no power. But if nobody says anything and nobody actually intercedes, they get away with it. And they did. To me, that's all I needed to see. It was completely grotesque. They changed government and dismantled huge parts of it forever. And they did it illegally. And so the building of this ballroom and the destruction of the White House, in a sense, it's metaphorical for what they are doing across the board in government. And it's being done with complete disregard for legality or illegality.
Senator Warren said that this destroyed East Wing, demolished East Wing, half demolished East Wing, now that you see, is a metaphor for the whole Trump presidency this time around. It's illegal, it's destructive, and it's not helping you. So hopefully the average voters will get it. But let me just come back on what you said a little bit, because the things that I would look at in this back and forth, and it was certainly not good for the challengers, it was good for Trump. But there were public interest groups that went to court very quickly, Mark. They were not like raided or stopped or had their, electricity cut off. They weren't jailed. They were allowed to have, to function as the rights groups that they are. They and their very able lawyers went to court very, very quickly. The unions, wish there were more unions in general and more unions in the federal government. We didn't have a union when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. We weren't unionized in the Department of Justice, but like the Treasury workers are. So the unions that existed went to the courts very promptly. They got very prompt hearings. Some of the judges, even judges picked by the Democrats, didn't seem to get it right away. I remember there was a Doge ruling where the court could have, a Democratic appointed judge, I think she was actually the judge on the January 6th case, instead of issuing a very rapid TRO that would have stopped Doge from fooling around in the Social Security records and other very private records, she didn't act right away. And that was a case for a temporary injunction. So they didn't have a perfect reaction to all those things, but the Trump administration has lost over and over again in many courts, and there are some things where they haven't lost, where they probably were supported by the law. And there were many things where you could really question the U.S. Supreme Court if they were really following the law as written and as interpreted. And so, yes, there were some judges that didn't act as quickly as they should have, but the cases did get brought to court, like I think this one's going to get brought to court. So,
well, this one, just because you ended with this one, I'll just say, sure. Again, this is a Trump dance. Oh, gosh, well, what am I supposed to do? Reconstruct the East Wing? I mean, it's gone. Okay, it's sort of like, what am I supposed to do? Bring Abrego Garcia back? He's in El Salvador. I mean, in the case of Garcia, they did bring him back, but there are many other American citizens who were deported as part of this ICE effort, and they're being sent to various countries all over the world and various institutions of deportation and detainment all over the world. And the court cases months later say, hey, you can't do that. That was illegal. Gosh, again, the vase is already broken. Humpty Dumpty, I can't put him back together again type thing. So I don't know, David. And I love this conversation and back and forth we're having, because I know you have such great faith in the law, and you should. You're a distinguished lawyer. And I have such a cynical view of the law because I see it unable to handle someone who is essentially a lawless figure with ultimate power over the entire Justice Department. And so we move to the 230 million and we go, gosh, I mean, as you say, there's an absurdity to it, but I don't see how the law restrains it except for what you've said, which is after the fact, people associated with that may actually lose their licenses to practice.
Well, let's just take the East Wing as one example.
Okay.
They go to court, and that's, of course, what Trump is going to, I broke the vase, and now you can't fix it. Ha ha, judge. Wasn't I clever as usual? I was faster than you were. These federal judges have huge power, including to issue injunctions. They can tell him to stop. And if that's the right remedy, tell him that it has to be rebuilt. Maybe if he was acting completely outside the law, as he may have been, use his own funds. Now that's dangerous too, because Trump's, when told to use his own funds, like when he got hit for $500 million in New York, it looks like instead of thinking, I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be deterred. You know, Trump's mentality is, I'm going to do a crypto grift. I'm going to take so many bribes that I'll be able to pay the $500 million out of my pocket and still have a lot of other dirty money in other pockets. And unfortunately, he gets inspired to figure out ways to take bribes and to do things that are illegal. But, you know, the remedy for something like that was the Congress. We have terrible luck, or especially with the voters and how they voted in certain states, that we don't have either a Democratic Congress or a House. That would be the normal way, oversight hearings by one of those bodies to deal with this kind of, this was a president that the framers saw coming. They saw somebody, like Napoleon, having won an election, never leaving, never abiding by the law. They saw something like that, and they saw the remedy. Actually, Napoleon got reined in by a legislature or parliament, as it were, in France in his era. So this is very much what they had in mind, and how you would rein in kings and tyrants, or would-be kings, since we weren't going to have a king. And tyrants would be that the House or the Senate would do it. They have absolutely abdicated. It is so shameful what the Republicans
have done.
They haven't stood up for their own institution. They haven't. They've surrendered their own power. That's not something that the framers really thought was going to happen, but we've seen it in our era. So what's the next remedy, Mark? The next remedy is the next election. And I know people are pessimistic about it. We are going to have an election. There's no stopping an American election. The pandemic didn't stop the American election. You have all these civil-minded people in all 50 states. They have deadlines. They gear up. They have the election. They have the vote. And I think the vote will go overwhelmingly against Trump and the Republicans, and that will restore an awful lot of order. Look at the 7 million plus people who went into the streets just the other day, peacefully protest. Think about that, Mark, because they knew how Trump was going to manipulate any kind of violence. Over 7 million people refrained from any violence, and they were totally peaceful. And that is from the determination. They say the vote now for redistricting in California is heavier than the presidential vote. So that's what else the framers had in mind, that when you have a would-be tyrant, the people would be sickened, repulsed, and would stand up to it. Well,
I love that you pointed to the way that the public has been animated. It's a remarkable thing, though, the way so much of the public that now is being affected by awful MAGA policies, farmers, working class Americans, those who are working and living paycheck to paycheck, are realizing that their vote for Trump is, directly affecting them in a negative way. Someone related a story to me. I meant to mention it to everybody, and I'll mention it to you and everybody right now, about the strength of the MAGA belief. This is someone in a friend of mine's family. I've just reconnected with him after a couple of years, and he was saying that they turned down. Now, they live in a trailer in a kind of subsistence living situation, government assistance, this kind of thing. And during the Biden administration checks that relieved a lot of the COVID burden, I think it was. Remember, there were some checks that went out to all Americans. They turned down the check. They didn't want it because it came from Biden. Now, this is a family that is desperate for every dollar just to stay alive. But the fervency with which they feel an allegiance to Trump and the MAGA movement is such that they didn't feel comfortable taking that check. That's the America that we're living in right now, David, and it's a remarkable thing to me, which is why sometimes issues don't matter it is, again, a kind of, now you could say, yeah, Mark, that's always 30% of the people are always going to be like that. And that might be true. But I'm just trying to speak to the power of the MAGA movement. I think it really is there. But as you've said, things are changing, and the economy and many of the revelations that are going to be sort of set upon Americans may begin to change that arithmetic,
So, Mark, do you want to talk about the Ninth Circuit cases, the Seventh Circuit case, the U.S. Supreme Court on the, sending the, basically violating the Posse Comitatus Act and sending the military into the cities?
I do, but I also want to make a note. Please leave time for me to ask you about the threat to New York voters that Donald Trump issued, should they vote for Mamdani in New York. But first, let's start with,
Can I say one thing before I forget? Mamdani went to my high school, the Bronx High School of Science. So be true to your school. I want all of your listeners to know my bias, going in.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, more on that as we continue. All right, what is the state of the state on these various deployments that will go to American cities, Portland and the rest?
Well, I think that basically the Supreme Court, the courts are going to do the right thing on this, because the idea that there is an emergency because the president says there's an emergency, that's just not the law. I mean, that's not the law on anything else. We don't have fiats like that. If the tariff case ends up going the way that you think, Mark, and the way the economist bot thinks it will, one of the reasons will be because of foreign affairs, that the president has more power in foreign affairs. But this is something that is it's so inside of what we stand for. This is not foreign affairs. This is whether you can send the military into our cities, whether you can send the military against civilians. And we've had decades and decades of finding that you can't. Ever since the Civil War, especially, people thought this is awful, to send the military against citizens, and only if there's a rebellion, Mark, or an insurrection. There has not been a rebellion or insurrection, and courts decide all the time whether definitionally something happened or not. So what the district judge, who was, I know her, and she was appointed by Trump, but she's a terrific judge. She was appointed during the first term, and I think she was probably better, he thought, than the other people in Democratic blue, 2 Democratic senators, Oregon. And so he accepted someone who was just terribly smart and middle of the road, and she ruled against him on just what I said, that it was untethered to the reality. It was untethered to the facts on the ground. There has not been rioting on a major scale that the local authorities couldn't handle. That's this, you need to have an insurrection or a rebellion, and it has to be something that's shown to be beyond what can be handled without sending in the troops. So they then went to the Ninth Circuit, and unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit panel was 2 judges picked by Trump, and it was like a love letter, between Bondi, Trump, and those 2 judges. Like they all like reading from the same, prayer book, but it's not the law. They said, well, it's up to the president to decide. We defer to his discretion. No, not if there's if those 2 elements are not met. If there's not a rebellion or insurrection, and if it hasn't been shown that dealing with it without the army, they could be dealt with without the army. So there was nothing like that in Oregon. Of course, we saw that down in LA. There was absolutely nothing like that. And that decision's still kind of bouncing around. But fortunately, LA is not that much of a problem anymore. I mean, there may be a deployment tomorrow that makes it a huge problem. But most of the Marines have been withdrawn. The National Guard have been withdrawn from Southern California, is my understanding. And so that leaves us with Chicago. And so what's going to happen with those 2 Trumpy judges is that the 3rd judge, who was appointed by Clinton and is an excellent judge, Graber, she immediately said this case should go to the full court. And because she asked it go to the full court, that started a process going where both sides had to file a brief. They've actually filed the briefs yesterday, Mark. So I think there'll be what they call en banc, which is they get 12 members of the court together, and as a bench, they decide, not the 3 people picked randomly, but as a bench, they decide. I think there are the votes on the Ninth Circuit to overturn that and to not allow the deployment in Oregon, which once the Ninth Circuit decides that will bar the deployment in San Francisco, and it'll bar it here in Los Angeles. That leaves Chicago, where the Seventh Circuit already decided the way that I just said. They already decided that the deployment cannot be done in Chicago. They may try to get that en banc or take that to the Supreme Court. They've taken one of these cases, the administration, to the Supreme Court. But again, I have confidence in this Supreme Court because there's just simply not a record. And as you watch TV all the time, I keep dreading the fact that there'll be days of rioting. There'll be something that the U.S. Supreme Court, even though it's not in the briefs, you know what I mean? If the whole country is watching this on TV and some areas convulsed by riots that the police really can't handle. But that hasn't happened. And that's why I'm so thankful to everybody out in America who realizes that they're just playing into Trump's hands if they get violent or if they do something at night, and if there are looters and stuff like that. These local authorities have to arrest the looters if they're doing something illegal. They have to prosecute the looters if people are doing violent things. I mean, one of my surmises is that they're provocateurs. They're really nothing but people who want to help Trump. For all I know, they're people who got pardoned by Trump. Am I being hyperbolic? No. Somebody pardoned by Trump, Mark, just threatened to kill the minority leader.
Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah.
Hakeem Jeffries, right. And it was reported in the media that at least the FBI did a good job this time. My understanding is that the FBI did not catch this person, Mark, that this was the state police in New York, which is what I say all the time. The state of New York, Illinois, California, they need to step up to the plate. Don't wait for the FBI to do stuff. There's no reason why every FBI agent who's good, who gets drummed out of the FBI, isn't hired by the California Bureau of Investigation, the New York Bureau of Investigation. Let them fight crime. And another example is, Mark, just while on my monologue, is George Santos. I've been saying for a long time, this is like Paul Manafort. There ought to be a state prosecution as well as the federal prosecution. It is foreseeable that Trump will pardon people that no one in their right mind except Trump would pardon. Or maybe he's not in his right mind. But anyway, nobody would pardon George Santos, the fabulous. He ripped off this guy, took money from some poor guy with some story about his dog. The restitution fell. When Trump pardoned Santos, the restitution order fell along with the rest of Trump's commutation. He doesn't owe the people that he ripped off. He doesn't owe the poor, I think he was a paraplegic, not Vietnam, he's a veteran. He's a veteran. And he swindled this fellow. It's all in the record. It's all in the sentencing. He swindled this fellow. He doesn't even have to pay him restitution. This is a timely case that the state should bring against him for those swindles, and they should put him right back in jail after he gets due process, after a fair sentencing. But from what I've seen of it, he should go right back to jail because 3 months was way too little. Take that from a criminal defense attorney. 3 months for Santos for what he did was way too little.
He took people's credit card numbers and ran up bills to pay for lifestyle stuff for himself. You know what I mean?
And when you take a debit card,
George Santos here.
Yeah, I mean, so
when you take a debit card, the credit card company doesn't lose. The poor guy who usually can't get a credit card, and so he desperately needs that money that's on his debit card. The poor person loses the money on his debit card, not the debit card company, when a Santos like that scams him.
Yeah, no, it's true. I wanted to thank you for visiting the question of the troops and the presence of troops and deployment of troops in American cities. I wanted to speak about the city of New York. The city has already been hit by Donald Trump's retribution associated with the monies that were already earmarked for so many of these various infrastructure projects, from the Holland Tunnel to the West Side Highway, et cetera. I mean, we're talking about almost $20 billion that was directed toward blue cities and blue states that's now been shut down because Donald Trump wants to make a point and basically take it out on the Democrats and the democratically controlled cities and states. But he took it to a different place, and I thought this place is illegal, which is he told New Yorkers that he would withhold funding for New York City if Zoran Mamdani wins the general election this November. And I think, I mean, there's nothing wrong with campaigning for a candidate if you wanted to go campaign for Cuomo or whatever. But I think if you're threatening like that, isn't that like a voter intimidation or of some kind? There must be laws, and I'm certain that there are laws that proscribe against that.
You know, Mark, every week we write the bill of particulars against Trump. How many pages long is it? Of course, you cannot do what he's doing. I mean, you can, I guess, say it. It's a kind of shakedown talk. You know, presidents don't talk that way except Trump. But there's several things wrong with it. One is impoundment. Even if you didn't have that piece of revenge, political threatening, the piece, you cannot impound funds if the money is voted for New York for a certain purpose. And we've had that over and over again with the impoundments. And in fact, one of the things that Congress has been doing to the Democratic minority is what they call a rescission. And a rescission is lawful because you say later on, we, the Congress that voted $5 billion for this project in New York, we've decided we're not going to spend it in New York, and they rescind it. They pass new legislation. If they have enough votes, that is not something good that happens to New York, but that's legal. Trump doesn't want to do that because even with these Republican majorities, he can't get the votes to impound or rescind the funds. So to rescind the funds. So 2 points on that. He just impounds them himself or threatens to impound them himself. That is illegal. Since the days of Nixon, that's been found to be illegal. There's binding U.S. Supreme Court precedent. Don't say to me they changed Roe v. Wade and they did presidential immunity. For all we know, they'll do that. I don't think that they're going to change the impoundment laws. And one of the things that the Democrats want in order to join in, to reopen the government, what they want Trump to do as part of Trump reopening the government, is to have the Trump and the Democrat and the Republicans agree not to do these rescissions, because what they did with the spending bills was they told the Democrats, okay, we're going to share the loaf, we're going to split the loaf, we're going to give you $10 million for $10 billion for projects that you want. And then they all signed, they got to the 60 votes. And then the Republicans turned around and said, oh, we want to rescind that. We want to take that back. And of course, the Democrats are saying, we can't run a government like that. We look, first of all, you're always humiliating us. We look terrible with our voters. The further left, the worse we look with those voters. So we said, we have to live with these bastards. So we at least agreed to get $10 billion for something that were our Democratic priorities. And then 2 months later, they took it back. So that's part of the deal that the Democrats want to make to reopen the government, is no rescissions in the future. That what is it made in these compromises, like if they're going to spend $100 billion, let's say, so that the Obamacare subsidies will continue, so people don't have these huge sticker shocks that they're having right now with their health premiums, that a month from now they don't say, oh, well, wait a second, we agreed to $100 billion. Well, we're rescinding, we're only making it 50. And can I say one more thing about New York? Because I followed this campaign. You have three fascinating characters, which let you have the floor and talk about.
No. It's please. I mean, this is a real shake it up election. Go ahead.
One is Cuomo, and of course he's very unpopular. And then there's a fellow who has his guardian angels. So this fellow for about 30 or 40 years has run around with a red beret. He's a colorful figure. He's a Republican, so he's had no chance of winning much of anything. But he stayed in the race. And so you have.
Well, I'll tell you a way that he could. I could tell you a way that he could put on a show, Sleewell. If Cuomo drops out, then I think many votes could go to Sleewell. I don't know if he could win, but all of a sudden he becomes way, way more relevant.
Katsadamas, I don't predict.
No, I mean, I don't think Katsadamas. Dude, he's a long shot. I don't need Katsadamas on that.
Bob Daddy's going to win. Bob Daddy's going to win. Take it to the bank.
Okay. I'm not even giving you credit if that happens. Come on, he's a front runner. But it is a fascinating election, and New York may become a very interesting place, given some of the policies that Mamdani has articulated. And,
people haven't followed it. The Slima on the right, he's the one who wears usually the red beret for his guardian angels. And he didn't wear the red beret, and he's a good speaker. And he had a couple of great lines. Cuomo said, when things have gone up so much since I left. And Sliwa went right in there and said, you didn't leave. You ran away from the impeachment by your fellow Democrats. You didn't leave.
I do hug and kiss people casually.
Yes, yeah, that's if that's the best you can do, the best explanation. I thought Mamdani was brilliant as well. I mean, he pivoted with a lot of Cuomo stuff as well on everything from the incompetence associated with his dominance in New York politics as to COVID handling. Essentially the seniors being getting a death sentence essentially because of the moving into these retirement homes of people with COVID. I mean, he botched COVID, never really owned it, and Mamdani was there to show him the receipts. And then, of course, the question of his relationship with various religious communities in New York. It was I thought a really fiery debate, and both Mamdani and, as you say, Sliwa, they both really managed it. Cuomo's real high ground from a debate standpoint, it seemed, was these guys don't know what they're doing. You need somebody who really has experience when it comes to running a city of this size. And their retort was, yeah, we've seen your experience. You screwed stuff up in a big, big way. So
Mamdani's great line, fellow Bronx Science alum, he said, we've experienced your experience. That's why people aren't voting for you, Cuomo.
Yeah, very, very good. Quickly, David, I wanted to just mention that the handing down of a judicial decision about the Pentagon and the book ban at U.S. military schools. I covered it a little bit yesterday, but I just thought it was worth noting. It was kind of, it's a feather in your cap. This is what I mean. I'm the grim one who always says, the justice system isn't going to help you out. They're going to let you down. They're not going to restrain Trump. They're not going to restrain Hegseth. Well, in this case, actually, to your credit, David Katz, or, with your faith in the judicial system, they did restrain the Pentagon. And they said, you cannot dry clean the libraries of all of these books that have to do with Black history, with DEI, et cetera.
Well, it's astonishing. Apparently, they run a lot of libraries, both in this country and I guess at some foreign U.S. bases. And so the Department of Defense decides what books are in there. I mean, like, they don't have anything better to do, like make sure China doesn't take Taiwan, like make sure we're doing the right thing in Ukraine. Anyway, they don't have anything better to do than to go through and figure out whether this book or that book. And, it's stuff that would probably blow your mind. I mean, it might be stuff like, DEI is like, it's like an analysis, just an analysis of our history. One thing that shocked me, I used to think that, it was kind of overblown, and, a lot of these debates were about like 10, gay lifestyle books. And then you see it's every book about American history. I mean, they clean these things of books about slavery. We had slavery in this country. That was the original sin. We're still dealing with the aftermath of slavery. Anybody
One of the books was called ABC of Equality. That's all it was called.
How could you not be an educated person in this country, an educated person in this country, and not know about slavery, Reconstruction, what happened, racially in this country? It's just astonishing. Anyway, the federal judge ordered that they put the books back. At least it was an interesting decision because I guess there were only certain books or certain libraries. So the judge limited it to the certain books and the certain libraries. But there'll be follow-up lawsuits that say, no, other books, really by the same reasoning, they should be put back, and they should be put back at all of these Department of Defense libraries.
Quickly, David Katz, in Arizona, the AG is suing to force House Speaker Johnson to seat Democratic elected by quite a large margin, Representative Grijalva. Can you speak to this case and this lawsuit?
The reason this one matters so much is that she'll be the vote that's needed for the discharge petition on the Epstein files. So with her vote, there'll be enough to have the House pass a bill that says, Department of Justice, you must discharge these, discharge the petition that says you have to. Now, will Trump find a way to prevent that? But at least we'll see. In other words, once they do the discharge petition, Mark, we'll see all the ways that Trump, Bondi, and Todd Blanche, Kash Patel at the FBI, how they try to thwart it, how they try to play games with it. And that is one thing that actually enlivens the MAGA base to sort of understand that, Trump, Patel, that these are not good people. These are not what they thought they were electing. So it'll make them play a lot of games. And she's the 218th vote. I think that's the amount that they need. And she is that vote. They haven't shaken anybody from their positions, so she'll be that vote. So he wants to delay her, the speaker, as long as he can. So she finally said, they have protests back there that say, swear her in, swear her in. The speaker's not swearing her in. And so there's a lawsuit that's now been filed. I think the lawsuit's overdue. I think it should have been filed the first week that the speaker didn't swear her in. And I think that it's meritorious because they now don't have any representation. There's a properly elected person. There's an idea everyone's supposed to have representation. There's 800,000 people in each congressional district, and they elect somebody under their state procedures. She's been elected under their state procedure. It's a ministerial duty of his to swear her in, and that district now doesn't have. Someone said taxation without representation. They do.
Sure.
They do. They're like the colonies, right? They got to pay taxes in that district in Arizona, and their representative won't be seated by the opposing party. I think she'll win that lawsuit.
The ruthlessness of the GOP is something on display in a way that we typically, I think, haven't seen in politics across the board on issue after issue, and this is one more way in which they're ruthless. David, thank you for hanging out. Again, you can find him on News Nation tomorrow. He's doing a big News Nation thing that he does on News Nation. He's an analyst. It's a big. He's a big deal. He's a big. I get it. I get it. Yeah, we're kind of like. I feel like we're the rehearsal for like when you go on News Nation. I got.
Not true. And News Nation's getting more audience, so it's like you, Mark. You know, it's growing. It's becoming more popular. So why not be part of it?
No, absolutely right. I'm only giving you a hard time. So I'm excited to see that, and of course you can find him here on Thursdays. Katz, you're wonderful, and we so appreciate our time with you. Have a great week, and break your leg tomorrow on News Nation and across the English-speaking world as we see you on more and more outlets that appreciate your great legal analysis. Appreciate it, pal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with all you guys.
All right. Bravo. Bravo.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah, thanks for slumming with us, David Katz. Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you, Sal the Shoemaker, for making that point. Yeah. Kim?
Yeah.
I wanted to do one story. I know we're a little bit, it was toward the end of the show, but I really did want to get to one story. It's a Pete Hegseth story, and I saw it today as I was preparing for the show. Albert, did I put it in or not? Oh my God, did I not put it in?
Did we talk about San Francisco? Did we see?
No. Mention that while I look for this.
Yeah,
please.
I wanted to, and I don't know if Albert can throw up the Trump's Truth Social post, but the White House, Trump was set to send in extra ICE agents, National Guard. We don't know what kind of surge was coming supposedly this weekend to San Francisco, and it now seems that is not going to happen. According to this Truth Social post made by Trump, he says federal agents will not be sent to San Francisco, that he was getting ready to surge the city with agents to crack down on crime and immigration, but he says friends in the area asked him not to move forward with it. So
yeah,
I guess
he said the
friends
tech
have
bros,
influence.
the friends, the tech community, which supported Trump in a big way, as you know. They're the ones who said, please don't send troops here. And so now he's not.
So they told him that Mayor Daniel Lurie is making progress in San Francisco. And then Trump talked to Mayor Lurie last night, who asked him to give him a chance, Lurie, a chance to turn it around. Trump said people he respects have called him, saying the future of the city is great. So as a result, Trump said they will not surge San Francisco on Saturday. San Francisco gets a reprieve from the federal takeover.
Wow. There you go. I mean, that is big news because it was odd that he was quick to put San Francisco on the list, you know. I had found something, and Albert, I sent you a picture of Hegseth in the fighter jet. It's the Top Gun thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things, Hegseth is a poser, okay? Hegseth is an incompetent, I don't want to say a guy with no military experience, because he actually did have military experience, but we've talked about his limited experience, and essentially he's a talking head. He was hired because he was, out of central casting, the way that Trump has hired a lot of these people. He speaks well on television, and he's a dogged defender of Donald Trump. But a lot of what he does is performative. And so it is with his latest stunt, in which he plays like Tom Cruise's Top Gun character. You see him there in the plane. That is your director of operations at the Pentagon. Yeah, he handles the Department of Defense. Well, it turns out that that was a total fraud. He doesn't know how to fly a plane. He has received no flight training. But that picture, again, reminiscent of Top Gun and the Tom Cruise character, that was posted on social media by Hegseth to, again, suggest his prowess and his flex and everything else that's implied by that picture, when the reality is he was a passenger on that flight. All done for social media, all done to simply create an image. So that's your latest word out of the Pentagon. This as the Pentagon spoils for war. I mean, the reality is quite a stark one, that the reality of these strikes on drug vessels, there have been 2 more, as you know, this time on the Pacific side. 5 people were killed. And now this is 9 known strikes against alleged narcotics trafficking boats since last month. 37 deaths. The first 7 strikes were with the Caribbean Sea, but this has the Eastern Pacific. And again, it is not clear that everybody involved in these various, the casualties associated with this were drug traffickers. In fact, there seems to be evidence that at least a handful of them were just fishermen. So this was announced by Pete Hegseth, the same guy who was in that fighter jet. He suggested that the boats were operated by, quote, a designated terrorist organization and were transiting along a known narcotic trafficking route in international waters. They were known by our intelligence, he said, to be involved in illicit narcotics smuggling. He didn't specify the organization that allegedly operated these boats. So he shared videos of the strikes, and as you know, I think that there's kind of a snuff video aspect to this. Kind of you're watching these people who may be innocents being killed by U.S. ordnance. So I'm very suspicious of this move. And the other thing that really bears touching on anyway is the way in which the door is now open and has been spoken of quite openly by this president to a land battle in Venezuela. The Trump administration saying to Congress that the U.S. is in a non-international armed conflict with drug cartels, arguing that the narcotics they smuggle kill tens of thousands of Americans every year. And this, that is to say that smuggling, constitutes an armed attack on the U.S. Then, as you know, they had 2 men who survived one of these attacks, and they were repatriated to their countries, Ecuador and Colombia. So they found no evidence in the case of those 2 guys that they'd committed a crime. So I don't quite understand it. Are you saying that there happened to be 2 guys who didn't commit any crime, that they were alongside a lot of other narco-terrorists? They just happened to be, they were catching a ride? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. The whole thing doesn't track. So what's happening now is, I think, the increased conversation around some kind of armed conflict and how these things can easily end up in a much bigger situation than even Trump or Hegseth could anticipate, meaning they don't really think it through. For them, it's a military flex. They are playing with fire. And I very much worry about what is going to happen.
It's
and
true.
Might we end up in an armed conflict in Latin America?
Well, it's not only the drug boats, the alleged drug boats being blown up, but Trump has called Nicolas Maduro illegitimately elected. Trump is threatening land action in Venezuela, saying it might not just be blowing up the drug boats. And we know that he's populated U.S. warships and U.S. troops now in the Caribbean area. So it's kind of an escalation of maybe provocation of some type of more serious conflict with Venezuela.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. They want regime change. So again, go back and build your ballroom, okay? The $300 million grift that is your ballroom, where every corporate entity from Meta to Google to Palantir, they all have a piece of the action. They're all going to donate to your ballroom, just as they've donated to your inauguration and they've donated to your other enterprises, just as they have invested with various Trump-related projects. Go back to that grift, because the price that's being paid by Americans right now for the chaos of tariffs, of the government shutdown, of all of these half-baked policies, the bailout of Argentina to handle the hedge fund community that is so heavily invested in Argentina that they need that bailout. These are all things that are wildly damaging to Americans as the inflationary spiral continues, as the SNAP checks, and as all of the various social programs are discontinued during this government shutdown, and even as government employees, everyone from air traffic controllers to TSA workers, they don't get checks. They're literally having to look into GoFundMe campaigns for them. Go do your ballroom, because this stuff, the battles you've chosen domestically and now in Latin America, it's serious stuff, and there are serious prices being paid as a result. Trump wants the Venezuelan oil. That is the main motivation for him, says Ole Hansen. No, maybe it's that too. Wouldn't surprise me. Quickly, the Trump administration says, Vilma, spending money like drunken sailors. I believe the taxpayers are going to end up paying for the grotesque White House ballroom. Of course that's true. Vilma is 100% right. Thank you for the $5 super chat. I was saying that before. I mean, the $230 million, it's close to $300 million check that you and I are going to write to him for whatever, damages as a result of these legal cases. That's his latest thing. He can come up with those every couple of months. You know, another way that I was an aggrieved party by this government is fill in the blank. It's grift on parade. Tom Graves says, fraud, waste, and abuse, hates competition. Yeah, ain't that true? I hear Trump hired undocumented workers and plans to deport them after this, so no taxpayer money will be used, no harm, no foul. Wouldn't surprise me. That was the case in New York. As you know, if you read David K. Johnston's stuff, it was all those Polish workers that were, then stiffed. Am I your favorite Delamater? You are, Richard. You are my favorite Delamater, Richard Delamater, with the $2 super chat. The Epstein Memorial Ballroom. I know they really should call it that. I think that's a great idea.
The only reason I'm here is because you are a friend.
That's my Elon. So happy. It's called corruption, Mark. Actual cost is $50 million, then Trump pockets the rest. Exactly. Paging auditors. Yeah, thank you, CC Ryder. That does sound about right. I don't understand how you spend $300 million on a ballroom. Don't understand it. You know, I know we've seen no plans. We've seen I'm not saying I should have approval of the plans, but I'm saying somebody should. It's this guy and this crew does what they want. So, I'm so I think I can't really respond to these without going into a thing. On the elections, Republican in Florida ran a very strong campaign encouraging people not to use mail-in ballots, but go to the election offices to vote for fear, fraud. Okay, now I'll accept that, Dylan Bob. It did seem, though, overwhelming. That you did all the Republicans just vote in person. Okay, I don't know. The skewing mostly had to do with the in-person vote. And so you could have that surge of Republicans. I'm not saying, you heard me ask Nathan about that, but it just did seem a little overwhelming. That's all. Buck, that's something to Buck. Here is Buck. There's no conspiracy theory here, Mark. Harris just sucked as a Democratic candidate. Progressives didn't vote for her. Now, I agree with that. I suck might overstate it, but I thought she was really weak. Never was a big Harris fan, and people in my audience hate me when I say this. They don't like when I say when I have any criticism for Biden or any criticism for Harris. I went to read you an email, I'll read it tomorrow, about how I criticized the Hunter Biden deal where he was on the corporate board. How can you criticize him? I was making the point the other day that his participation in that, the Ukrainian energy deal, it was for, what was it, $10 million? That's nothing compared to the Trump grift by their kids. I thought Hunter Biden, I was making a point about for Biden, but even that wasn't good. My audience just doesn't want anything said about Hunter Biden. What I was simply making the point about was the fact that this crew, the Trump kids, are literally involved in a grift that makes whatever Hunter Biden made on his best year, because he was a Biden, makes it look like a rounding error. So I was making a point that the grift associated with the Trump crew is so much greater than the very things they accused Hunter Biden of. But even when I made that point, it was like, don't say anything about Hunter Biden. Don't mention him at all. Okay. Gosh, I'm sorry. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but I'm glad I did. It was a lot of fun. All right. How dare you play that music, Albert, when I'm just beginning my rant, Albert. How dare you?
We got some
I have
poker
more
games.
in me, Albert.
Why are you yelling?
We have a poker game to attend to.
We have a rigged poker game to go attend to.
Who's the fish?
Who's the fish? Mark is always the fish. All right. Tomorrow, Mo Kelly joins us. Michael Shore joins us. And
has it ever occurred to you that instead of running around, given the nature of all this news, this could be a lot more complex. I mean, it's not just, it might not be just such a simple,
I'm Sheriff Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
2 MIT professors join us tomorrow, too.
What?
Yeah. All right. Out of time. Bye-bye.